headlines, Korea's rival political parties meet victims' families of the April ferry disaster in their latest attempt to break a political impasse over a bill that's been blocking all legislative action for weeks. Consumer sentiment picks up in August on the back of anticipation over the government's stimulus measures, although it still hit below the pre-ferry disaster level. And an open-ended ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians aimed at ending their 7-week conflict takes hold in Gaza. The focus now shifts to securing an arrangement for the long term. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. You're watching Arirang News. We begin with Korea's August consumer sentiment picking up on anticipation of the government's recently announced stimulus measures, but we still have some way to go to recover to the levels before the April ferry disaster. Hwang Ji-hye starts us off.
The Korean government's efforts to shore up economic sentiment are bearing fruit. The Bank of Korea says the consumer sentiment index stood at 107 in August, up 2 points from a month earlier. The figure marks a rebound from July, suggesting that Korean consumers might be returning to their spending habits that were dented after April's ferry disaster. The index hovered at around the 108 level in the first 4 months of this year, but dropped to 105 in May following the disaster. The central bank says the improvement was spurred by a widely expected rate cut this month and government stimulus measures that were instituted by Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan's new economic team. While indications are that consumer sentiment is improving, the August figure is still below the level posted before the ferry tragedy.
A new survey we conducted shows that more than half of the firms surveyed expect the negative impact of the ferry tragedy to last through next month. Those who think it will last for more than 2 or 3 months made up more than 30%.
The monthly index is a gauge of the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. A reading over 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. Although the economy is not running in full steam for now, expectations are high that there will be a pickup in private spending with one of the nation's biggest holidays, Chuseok, right around the corner. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And a chronic obstacle facing Korean society is its rapidly aging population. And to tackle those concerns that the state-run public pension may not be enough to support the senior population at some point, the Korean government will obligate all companies in the country to offer their employees private retirement plans in 8 years' time. By 2016, all companies with 300 or more employees would be required to do this. And by 2022, the provisions would extend to all companies regardless of size. All the I's have been dotted and all the T's crossed in a merger of 2 top Korean IT companies. Kakao will officially launch on October 1st. As our Kwon-sool reports, the company has a goal of making its name known in the global market.
The deal is sealed. The merger of Daum Communications, Korea's second-largest internet portal, and Kakao Corporation, the nation's #1 mobile messaging service, was approved by all associated shareholders on Wednesday. It comes 3 months after the 2 companies announced the merger through a stock swap arrangement. Daum Kakao will officially launch on October 1st and is expected to be co-led by Kakao CEO Lee Se-gu and Daum CEO Choi Se-hun. At the shareholders' meeting Wednesday, Lee said he hoped the new company would not only have a reach in the domestic IT market, but also in the global market. The merger is expected to impact Korea's top search engine provider, Naver, and its messaging service Line, which as of now have a much bigger global user base compared to Kakao's messenger service, Kakao Talk. Daum Kakao says the new company's services will not only be restricted to the online world, but that it will expand into a platform that can be used in everyday life. The market capital of the new company could rise to over 10 trillion won, or nearly $10 billion US, as Daum's current value is $2.2 billion and Kakao's is at around $9 billion. Industry watchers therefore expect Daum Kakao to eventually become the most valued company on the tech-heavy Kosdaq stock exchange. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And staying in the tech space, Chinese manufacturers have recently been loosening Korea's tight grip on the smartphone market, but apparently it's not just smartphones. Research firm Display Search says 3 Chinese television manufacturers, including Xiaomi and Lenovo, recently released products at extremely low prices, some up to 30% cheaper than similar ones on the market. Xiaomi, for example, is selling its a 49-inch ultra-high-definition TV for around $650. That's about 4 times lower than similar class models offered by Samsung. American intelligence agencies reportedly have grave suspicions that North Korea is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. Shin Se-min has the details.
You're looking at North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sitting atop of a Romeo-class submarine. The photos of Kim surfaced in June when he visited a naval unit of the Korean People's Army and, according to North Korean state media, conducted a drill and instructed the captain on navigation methods. His visit is part of North Korea's efforts to shore up the underwater operation capability of its submarines. And it seems the North is making inroads. U.S.-based media outlet Washington Free Beacon reports that U.S. defense intelligence agencies recently detected a previously unseen missile launch tube on a North Korean submarine. North Korea is reportedly developing a ballistic missile submarine that, if confirmed to be true, would significantly raise the threat posed by the nuclear-armed communist state. According to the report, U.S. intelligence shows Pyongyang is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. North Korea is also believed to have already obtained submarine-launched ballistic missiles from Russia. Pentagon spokesman Jeffrey Poole refused to comment on the report, saying he was not allowed to discuss matters of national intelligence. However, he did say the U.S. urges Pyongyang to be more transparent with its defense activities for the sake of regional peace. If the report is true and Pyongyang has developed its capability, the U.S. will have to look into strengthening its missile defense systems on the West Coast, as North Korea would be capable of hitting Alaska. U.S. bases in Japan, the Philippines, and Guam would also be well within range of a North Korean strike launch from waters in Asia. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The U.S., meanwhile, has dismissed repeated calls by North Korea to halt its regular joint military exercises with South Korea. The Pentagon's press secretary John Kirby says the exercises will continue, adding that Washington's alliance with Seoul remains steadfast and ironclad. He then urged Pyongyang to meet its international obligations. These comments come a couple of days after North Korea's deputy ambassador to the United Nations said the joint drill was a preparation for a nuclear attack against North Korea and that Pyongyang stands ready to use its nuclear weapons if necessary.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on Arirang TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. Leaders of the ruling Saenuri Party are currently in talks with bereaved families of the April's ferry disaster, the second of its kind. The meeting is about legislation that will set up a special investigation into the accident. While the families want their selected legal experts to have authority to investigate and indict as well, the ruling party is reportedly offering them more say in the formation of the probe team. Meanwhile, the opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, whose proposal for a three-way negotiation with the ruling party and the families was rejected earlier this week, is currently staging a public rally at Gwanghwamun Square. Political discord over the ferry bill has paralyzed parliamentary affairs here in Korea, delaying passage of major economy and reform-related bills. And a quick check on the situation in Korea's southeastern region, where record downpours early this week left a trail of destruction. The death toll now stands at 13, according to a YTN report today. All those found were passengers on an intercity bus that was swept away by fast-moving currents on Monday. Search operations continue for those who remain missing in the disaster, while rail services gradually start to resume normal operations in the area. All of this as more than 240 millimeters of rain fell in the southeastern part of the country on Monday in just about 3 hours, leading to landslides and flash flooding. Google is opening a new platform for startup companies here in Seoul next year. The internet company says what will be called Campus Seoul will represent its first such venue in Asia. The community will provide support to entrepreneurs and also offer mentorships while providing opportunities for businesses to expand overseas and attract investments. Google says the support comes with no strings attached. Once it's established, the Google campus in Korea will be the world's third. The first one launched in London back in 2012, followed by another one later that year in Israel. Korea has many nicknames, one of them being a coffee republic. You're bound to see at least one or two or many more coffee shops within every block in Seoul, and there's a high chance that it's a Starbucks. The only downside, though, for the consumers could be the price. Kana Kim tells us more.
Look around, and it won't be too hard to find a place to grab a cup of coffee. But none have quite the presence that Starbucks has. Just across the street from where I'm standing is another Starbucks that's quite as busy as this one.
Actually, there are so many in Seoul, 284 Starbucks coffee shops in the capital city. Now that's more than you'll find in New York City, Shanghai, London, or Seattle, where the company was founded. So why are customers finding their way to a Starbucks?
There are many items on the menu and a lot of Starbucks stores. They are easy to find, so that's why I continue coming.
I like the brand image, and the stores are clean compared to other coffee shops.
But enjoying the company's fresh brewed coffee comes with a higher price. Customers are paying a premium for a cup of joe at Starbucks stores in Korea, on average $4.85. That's nearly twice the amount customers pay in the United States. For an Americano, the data shows that Korea ranks 6th on the price list, behind countries like Poland and Greece. As for the expensive markup for the same coffee drinks, Starbucks Korea declined to comment to Arirang News. But according to Korean daily 동아일보, Starbucks Korea says different operating costs and cultural factors are the reasons, and that using numbers may not be the best way to draw comparisons. But do they justify higher prices? Well, perhaps, when compared with other domestic coffee chains in the country, Starbucks prices are on par with those found at domestic coffee chains. It appears that Koreans, generally speaking, are willing to shell out a little extra for a cup of coffee, no matter where it comes from. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The latest discovery of nearly 80 Buddhist artifacts on the outskirts of Seoul was revealed to the public last week. They're among some of the finest reserved, preserved, and historically important pieces related to Northeast Asian Buddhism. Our Song Ji-sun has this report.
At the entrance of a trail leading to summit of Dobongsan Mountain in northern Seoul sits Dobongseowon. During Korea's Joseon dynasty, which spanned more than 500 years until the late 19th century, Dobongseowon acted as an institute for educating young scholars and remembering historic ones. This particular institute was dedicated to Jo Gwang-jo, a Confucian scholar who pursued radical reforms in the early 16th century. But recent discoveries at the site have people, historians in particular, looking even further back to the Goryeo dynasty, which ruled most of the Korean peninsula between the 10th and 14th century. A total of 77 Buddhist artifacts from the Goryeo era have been discovered here at Dobongseowon, a site that functioned as a Confucian academy during the Joseon dynasty. The site, currently being restored, is set to be reopened next year. Among the dozens of artifacts excavated, one very sophisticated piece that's unique to the Goryeo era stands out. It's this Keungangnyeong, a bell used in Buddhist ceremonies during prayer chants. It's the first known piece in which the 4 heavenly guardians and the 5 great kings are engraved on one instrument, a first not just in Korea, but in other Northeast Asian countries where Buddhism has roots. Although these artifacts were found at an institute that was used during the Joseon dynasty, at a time when Buddhism was suppressed to foster Confucianism, they were not hidden or destroyed.
Before transforming into an institute, the site was used as a temple in the Goryeo era. It is assumed that these artifacts were buried as part of a ceremony to pay respect to the Buddha. These were found inside these larger pots, which helped to preserve their original shapes and materials relatively well.
The preliminary report on these artifacts will now be handed over to art historians, who will conduct further studies and look for clues about Buddhist practices during the Goryeo era. 송지선, Arirang News.
After some 8 ceasefire deals in a 50-day war, Israel and Hamas have agreed on an indefinite truce now. Let me just add that this is after more than 2,000 people, mostly civilians, have been killed in this violence. And for more, Paul E. is joining us from the news center today. Paul, what are the conditions for this extended ceasefire?
Well, the Egyptian-backed deal will allow Palestinians to start rebuilding, as well as partially lift an 8-year blockade of Gaza, which was a sticking point during the weeks of negotiations. The long-term ceasefire that took effect on Tuesday appears to be holding. This as leaders from all sides prepare to return to Cairo to work out a permanent peace plan. Our Son Jung-in has this report.
The long-term truce was announced Tuesday after Israel and Hamas agreed to halt fighting indefinitely, bringing an end to 7 weeks of conflict. The truce brokered by the Egyptian government was reached after 2 days of extensive negotiations in Cairo. The terms of the deal appeared to be almost the same as the one proffered at the beginning of the conflict, easing the blockage of Gaza to allow relief supplies and reconstruction materials to pass through. It also extends the fishing limit to 6 nautical miles from 3 nautical miles. Joyful Palestinians poured into the streets to celebrate. However, fighting continued right up until the truce was declared, with 1 Israeli killed and several injured, according to its officials, while in Gaza, 2 Palestinian children were reportedly killed in an airstrike. Both sides will likely return to Cairo sometime within the next month to address more contentious issues, including Israel's call for militant groups to disarm and Hamas' demands for an airport and seaport in Gaza and the release of Palestinian prisoners. The ceasefire follows at least 8 temporary truces during the course of the conflict that began on July 8th. More than 2,200 people were killed and tens of thousands were left homeless, mostly in Gaza. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
And in another welcome development, I would say, the leaders of Ukraine and Russia have vowed to work together in bringing peace to the war-torn region in the eastern part of the Ukraine. And this announcement, Paul, comes after both leaders sat down for talks yesterday in Belarus. What exactly came out of this meeting?
Well, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko described the 2-hour face-to-face talks with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin as very tough and complex. They were part of wider negotiations with European officials aimed at ending the crisis in eastern Ukraine. Poroshenko said all leaders had agreed to support an urgent ceasefire plan to defuse the conflict between the rebels and government forces. He added that consultations would soon begin on forming a trilateral contact group to draw up a peace plan, one that would be made in cooperation with European security monitors. At a joint press conference with the EU foreign policy chief, Poroshenko said the Ukrainian people were tired of war and that the country needed peace today.
I can say that the idea of the peace plan was finally supported by all heads of states without exception. And we firmly insisted that, first of all, an agreement has to be reached to secure peace and freedom for Ukrainian citizens who are being illegally kept by illegal armed forces. We'll also see very soon the liberation of the hostages who are being held.
Despite the positive tone, it remains unclear how the pro-Russian separatists will respond to the ceasefire proposal as fighting continues in the east of the country. A recent UN report claims at least 2,000 people have died in the conflict since fighting began earlier this year.
I see. And Paul, the World Health Organization has called for stricter measures on electronic cigarettes, warning that they could pose a serious health threat. I mean, I'm not a smoker myself, but here in Korea we have one of the highest smoking rates in the world, and I do see some people with e-cigarette or a vaping trend thinking that this is part of the solution.
Well, electronic cigarettes were naturally assumed to be less harmful than conventional ones, but the jury's still out on whether that's a fact. And it's this gray area that has prompted the UN Health Agency to call on countries to ban the sale of all e-cigarettes to minors. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
More and more people these days are reaching for electronic cigarettes as a way to quit smoking.
If you use electric cigarettes, you will smoke less tobacco.
Although potentially less harmful than traditional cigarettes, there are mounting concerns regarding the health risks of e-cigarettes. And the World Health Organization has drawn up a report calling for stricter regulations. It calls for the prohibition on e-cigarette manufacturers from making unproven health claims, such as they help people quit smoking, until there is convincing scientific evidence to support them. The WHO also urges a ban on the use of e-cigarettes in public places until it is proven that exhaled vapor is not harmful to bystanders. The report also says fruit, candy, or alcoholic drink-style flavors should be prohibited until evidence shows that they're not attractive to teenagers. The report warned that exhaled e-cigarette vapor could increase the levels of toxins and nicotine in the background air and pose a greater threat to teenagers and the fetuses of pregnant women who use the device.
Underlying reasons for regulation are really to impede then the promotion of these products to non-smokers and youth.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a separate report saying that teenagers that have used e-cigarettes were more likely to smoke real cigarettes. The WHO will hold the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in October and discuss the issue with member states. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And finally, Paul, a British father has been reunited with his two missing daughters following a nationwide search in Thailand for the past 3 months. It looks like a happy ending, certainly, to what could have been a tragic story.
Well, for the father, Robert Day, it appears so. Authorities were able to track down 11-year-old Ananya and 6-year-old Alina last week in Bangkok after they went missing on vacation. The two children were allegedly abducted by their Thai mother this past June. Day was granted full custody of his two young daughters following a divorce in 2010. Emotions were running high as Day thanked police for returning his girls.
So much pain. You know, I've looked after my children all their life. You know, and to get them back, it's wonderful. You know, I don't want to lose my girls. My girls are my world.
Police say the mother has been arrested. However, she has not been charged yet with any offense. The two girls said they were happy and that they were planning to return home to England next week. Chetty?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that happy note to end our segment today. And we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. Well, it's been a breezy day here in Seoul, but conditions are quite different down south. And a heavy rainfall watch has been issued for Jeju, which is getting heavy downpours at this hour. But it's not only Jeju. Those in both Jeollado provinces are also receiving heavy showers. So through tomorrow, 30 to 80 millimeters is forecast for Jeju and up to 30 millimeters for other southern areas. The rain will clear up by tomorrow afternoon. Overall, Thursday is shaping up to be a cloudy day for most parts of the country, and a heads up for those of you in Jeju as heavy precipitation of more than 30 millimeters per hour accompanied by strong winds and thunder is once again in forecast for Friday. On to tomorrow's readings. Seoul hits 31 while cities down south hover around 26. On to other places. Jeju peaks at 24, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang hit the mid-20s. That does it for me for now, and I'll be back with more updates after 10. See you then.
Yes, we'll see you then. Bo-kyung, thank you very much. And that will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching.